This is Nasha Kasha, a Ukrainian almanac. 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. Nasha Kasha is heard on 18 campus and community radio stations from Newfoundland to British Columbia. I'm your reporter, Stefan Andrusiak. Segments of this program were recorded in 2018 and 2020. This is episode 285. It is November 2021, Holodomor Awareness Month. The Ukrainian famine and genocide is one of the most heinous crimes in human history, the result of a deliberate political totalitarian process to eliminate millions of Ukrainians, even Ukrainian Mennonites, in the early 1930s by starving an area long known as Europe's breadbasket. So writes Peter Monastyrsky, a former president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Manitoba branch. In the next 28 minutes, you will hear the voice of a Holodomor survivor. Others will ask, how can it be that this genocide, recognized so widely by historians and by 17 national governments, has not a single mention in any English language dictionary?
Коли навколо ні душі, коли моя не може спати, чомусь так хочеться мені для тебе пісню заспівати. І неї чекає цілий світ, не забере мене від тебе, ані їх колючий дріт, ні синє небо, ані чужий терновий цвіт.
It is a sunny, cold day in October. I stand in front of Winnipeg City Hall, facing the first monument in Canada to have been erected to the memory of those who perished in the Holodomor. Simple, 15 feet tall, black granite with a central image of a mother and a child. Its trilingual inscription reminds me that we must never allow the withdrawal of food to be used as a weapon.
Коли навколо ні душі, коли моя не може спати,
Hello, I'm Irka Balan from Winnipeg. I grew up in Winnipeg, and my parents came from Ukraine after the war. My sister and I were born here in the North End. My parents have both passed away, and my sister lives in Dallas. My mother was from Khersonshchina, a village called Kalanchak, and my father was from Sukashchina, from a village called Dobryachin. My mother, since she was from southern Ukraine and she went through the Holodomor, a lot of the parents that my parents knew, the friends that they had, we the children didn't talk about it. Even when the monument was unveiled, the survivors were not acknowledged at that point because of the political situation in Ukraine. It was important to have the monument as a beginning of the awareness here in Winnipeg, because we had many survivors who had come to Winnipeg. It made a statement in 1984 for the entire community here in Winnipeg.
What was the Holodomor?
At that time, we called it was a holod. My parents would always say it was a holod.
Holod is the Great Hunger.
Right. Holodomor, a term later that was a recognized term, but in the beginning years, we called it a holod. What my parents told me, especially my mother, because she was the one who went through it, I think she was 6 or 7 years old. They had a family situation where they had land. They were from Kozacka Rodina. They had a vibrant community. All of a sudden, everything was taken away. My mother's mother was sent to Siberia, to Vorkuta. My Dido was shot because he wouldn't give up his land. We never did know where his grave was. And then I found out when I was in Ukraine, he was shot a few miles away, and probably somewhere in the woods he was buried. That's all we know about my Dido.
All of this transpired under Stalin's leadership.
Yes, my babusia was in Vorkuta for 10 years, and my mother and her sisters were basically orphaned. Some of the family members took them in, but they wandered from house to house. My babusia came back to Kalanchak, but never back to the house, and the house was given to someone else to live in, and she was taken to a plantation, a cotton plantation.
When you say she came back from a prisoner camp,
Yes.
And your babusia was your grandmother.
Yes, she was reunited with the children, but they weren't allowed to come back to their original house. They had to live in another place, Chervony Mayak, which is on the Dnipro, in an old monastery.
How many other Ukrainians at the time were acknowledged as having lived through the same kind of horror?
We never acknowledged them publicly, all the many families. It wasn't something you talked about because you couldn't really, because of the political situation in Ukraine. Everyone was fearful of giving out too much information about their families in Ukraine, and so they refrained. Because a lot of the families also had, especially boys who were enlisted in the army, like my cousin was. They sort of denied it and didn't talk about it. Every time I visit that house where my mother grew up, the roof that is there, when she said that they had nothing to eat and they had to catch sparrows in their nests and boil them. These kind of images are so strong in my mind when I look at that house. I think that everyone who has a family member who went through the Holodomor should go back to Ukraine and visit their origins. We have all kinds of events. We work with the Jewish community to understand what they went through. We also understand how the other genocides, how their people went through these. It was a rude awakening for all of us to understand that all the genocides that have been recognized in their communities and how we are very similar in many ways. This is like a cause for the rest of my life.
Some ongoing construction. We're hoping this will wrap up tomorrow. And with the Toronto Marathon closures, we're now just keeping our eyes on a little bit of an update for you. We're getting word that the portions of the lakeshore might be opening, and we're going to be waiting for this update.
I'm riding a chartered bus with 30 fellow travelers heading from London, Ontario to Exhibition Place in Toronto. It's Sunday, October 26th, 2018. We're on our way to the unveiling of a long-awaited statue to the victims of the Holodomor, finally being commemorated in Canada's largest city. Our driver, Mike, is worried that a marathon not far from our intended destination will delay us. Next to me, a woman in her 90s with a story of survival.
Я називаюся Олександра Тищенко.
Oleksandra Tishchenko, maiden name Sanik. Oleksandra was born September 6, 1925, the village Orlянське. It was fairly large and in Zaporizhia.
Село Орлянське, Запорізька область, Василівський район. Велике було село. Але ми діти, як то діти, бігали по дорозі.
Children would play in the streets. There were no cars, she said. One day, she witnessed strangers carrying furnishings out of a nearby home. The owner nowhere to be found. A neighbor stood and cried.
Крісла, таке, шкафи, люди виносять, і людей багато стоїть, а одна жінка стоїть, плаче.
When she ran to tell her mother only said, "Oh my God, oh my God."
Кажу, мамо, там виносять усе з хати, а жінка плаче. Вона ж продають, чого ж вона плаче, мама? Ой, Боже мій, Боже мій.
Alexandra was no older than 8 at the time. She remembers her grandfather at the door of her home listing villagers who were the latest to have been taken away.
А діди каже, уже повезли того, повезли того, повезли того.
And so it would come to pass that one day a hay wagon pulled up to their front door. Her mother and 5 children got in. She could not see them, but she heard people along the way bringing bits of produce like potatoes from their gardens and dropping them one by one into the wagon as it passed.
Другий бере за руку маму і каже, сідай у гарбу.
Their wagon driver would let them off in a field. Meanwhile, her father, who had gone into hiding for fear of being sent away, returned.
Вже ж ні води, нічого не було пити, так ми переспали, сидячи. А на ранок тато прийшли.
The family would travel from village to village, begging what they could, accepting refuge in stables and sheds. Her father appeared one day with pockets full of chaff he had gathered from a horse barn.
Коні там, і вони набрали дерть.
Her mother tried to boil it into a rough porridge.
Тато щось тут у стелі прив'язали ті вішки там, і стоять.
Then, one day, she watched as, standing, her mother gave birth to her 6th baby, a boy.
А тоді жінка одна прибігла. Стали. А мама родила дитину якраз в той час. А вона заплакала, а жінки, ой, Господи, мама плаче. А тато каже, це жінку, нам Бог поможе.
Alexandra's eyes well up as she remembers begging a farmer for half a cup of milk and how tempted she was to drink it herself, but she relented for the good of her baby brother. The parents and all 6 children survived the Holodomor. That little brother now lives in Oshawa. When she had finally made her way to London, Ontario, Alexandra was asked where she wanted to work. A kitchen, surrounded by food, was her reply. The bus arrives with plenty of time to spare, and we join as attendants at exhibition place swells well beyond 1,000.
We did good coming here.
Good driving, good driving.
Yeah, we are going to park the buses along here, so I'm just going to pull up a bit, and I'll stay with the bus, and yeah, it's colder.
Okay.
Моє ім'я є Оксана Рева, я є голова проєкту Holodomor Memorial Toronto.
Oksana Reva is past president of the Toronto branch of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. She headed the Toronto Holodomor Memorial Project, persistently lobbying and maneuvering its way toward completion.
Ініціатива, яку розпочала пані Марійка Шкамбара.
She credits others for having started it decades ago. Time and time again, after new mayors would come and leave office, there was always a reason why it would be delayed.
Кожен раз був якийсь інший мер і обіцяли, що ми будемо мати місце. Але це ніколи не зійшлося, аж поки мер Торі став мером Торонто. І я, може, є трошки вперта, але я від нього...
It wasn't until John Tory became Toronto's mayor that the memorial project began to take shape. Mayor Tory, for his part, recalled that Oksana Reva was not an easy person to say no to.
John Tory was elected mayor. We have a phenomenal site, and with our great community support, we have built the Holodomor Memorial here in Toronto.
Добрий день, слава Ісусу Христу, вічна я пам'ять. I am honored to be here today.
Among the onlookers having combined their trip here to Toronto with a trade show was a delegation of 20 led by Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister.
Степан Кубів, голова меморіалу в Україні, перший віце-прем'єр України, Кабінету міністрів України.
We are here, he says, to represent the President and the Parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. The opening of this memorial is an act of remembrance. We have traveled to pay tribute to those who sacrificed. Soviets annihilated more than 13 million people.
Сьогоднішній день сам відкриття меморіалу – це пам'ять. Їх вбивали і нас вбивали, бо ми українці.
In our program, we heard a snippet of the theme from the movie Bitter Harvest. Okean Elzy sang, "That barbed wire will not separate us from our memory." You also heard the late Kvitka Cizik with Koleskova, a lullaby. And this is the hymn, Bože Veliki Jedini, God, you are one and great, by the Prometheus Choir, recorded with their permission at Exhibition Place. Conductor, Pavlo Fondera.
Hi, Stefan. This is Natalka Duduch here, reaching out to you and your listeners from St. Catharines, Ontario. My husband and I immigrated here from Montreal in 1989 and absolutely fell in love with a vibrant Ukrainian community. Since I retired from civil service, I have had the opportunity to dedicate more time and efforts to various community ventures, and not least of which is sharing the truth about Holodomor. My mother, born in the region of Poltava in Ukraine in 1925, remembered very clearly and was able to relate to her family the daily horrors she faced during Holodomor in the years 1932-33. My father's Ukrainian language radio program, Ukrainski Chas, Ukrainian Time, was one of the first media to speak openly about Holodomor in the early 70s. After reading excerpts on the air from my mother's diaries, I vividly recall us getting phone calls and letters threatening harm to me and our family unless we stopped speaking about Holodomor. My mother's stories detailed horrors of her family and friends' deaths by this artificial famine. But also, I heard stories of survival, some of which were no less horrific. Настав страшний
It was 1933.
1933 рік, в якому безбожна большевицька
A godless Bolshevik leadership murdered millions.
влада мільйонів українського населення за те, що не хотіли покоритися і вступати у колектив.
Ukrainians refusing to submit to collective
У
farming.
кожній українській хаті котилася страшна чорна мара смерти.
The nightmare death spared no one.
Люди тинялися голодні, пухлі,
Swelled with hunger,
шукали собі їжі по полях,
searching,
по садках,
fields, gardens,
ішли до міста,
even cities.
але і там не минала їх страшна смерть.
Special sentries would turn them away
В містах таких не пускали.
to certain death.
Спеціально стояла сторожа і завертали людей назад на голодну смерть.
They dropped like flies, dying.
Люди падали мертві, як мухи, лежали по дорозі, по полі і в садках мертві люди.
I watched children eating their own fingers.
Діти з голоду обгризували свої власні пальці до кісток. Цілі сім'ї, цілі вулиці, цілі села стояли пустими.
Entire villages stood empty, dead.
Не минуло тяжке горе і нашу хату.
Barely alive, my mother's sister arrived.
Прийшла з другого села мами сестра Христя, поховала чоловіка і двоє діток.
Having buried her husband, 2 children.
Ледве що добралася до сестри, вся пухла вже і заморена.
Said she, I thought I could at least find some herbs here.
А я думала, сестро, що хоч у тебе є що їсти.
She went to search in our yard,
Пішла вона в садок по зілля,
and there she died.
та там і померла. As I grew older, along with my mother, who blessedly lived to see 90, I came to understand Holodomor in new ways. First, personally, as an adult with my own children, I could finally see the emotional ravages of Holodomor on my mother's spirit. A person of deep faith, she struggled her whole life with deep feelings of guilt, what we now call survivor's guilt, I guess, and feelings of unworthiness. This was, and still is, very painful and difficult for me at times to process. Now it's 2020. As a member of our very active local branch of Ukrainian Canadian Congress, I joined the National Holodomor Awareness Committee of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, whose goal is to share the story of Holodomor with the broadest spectrum of Canadian societies, both Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian alike. 2020 is a year none of us will forget with the pandemic, but it also has become a banner year of activities surrounding Holodomor awareness. The Holodomor National Awareness Tour created a new and innovative campaign with the goal of the word Holodomor included in all English language dictionaries. I'll finish off today by sharing one more activity. The Ukrainian World Congress International Holodomor Coordinating Committee will be announcing its new initiative to create an international network for descendants of Holodomor victims. I am a member of the Canadian contingent. The goal of this global network will be to create a platform for communication, support, advocacy, and activism, a database of descendants interested in participating and learning more about Holodomor, and the new network is also being created. Take care, and God bless.
My name is Bogdan Onishchuk. I'm in Toronto, and I'm the chair of the Canada-Ukraine Foundation and also the Holodomor National Awareness Tour. We've been running the Holodomor bus across Canada for the last 5.5 years and have delivered about 1,500 classes, lessons to high school students in some 450 schools from Vancouver to Halifax, and over 40,000 students, high school students, have taken in the lessons, one of the 3 lessons that we have on the bus, which talk to Holodomor and its relevance to the world today. And a lot of the students would ask us after the lesson, as they were walking out, why have we not heard about Holodomor before? I didn't know such a word even existed. Well, we always answered that it's because the Soviet Union denied it and covered it up. Putin still denies it to this very day. But then it hit us. What does a person do if they don't know a particular word? Well, they go to the dictionary to find it. But if the word isn't in the English dictionary, what does that mean? What does that do? That means it's so it doesn't exist. But if a word is in the English language, it gets the status of respectability and legitimacy, because it's not something that you can find in the internet where you don't know whether it's fake or not. It's legitimate. It's a legitimate event. It's a legitimate word, and that gives it special status. So the Jewish world community understood this very well, and so they got the word Holocaust into the dictionaries. In fact, they have 2 words in the world's dictionaries for Holocaust. The first is the word the Holocaust, with a capital H. The other one is the word Shoah, S-H-O-A-H, which is the Jewish word for the Holocaust, the extermination by the Nazis of the Jews. And of course, at the moment, we've got 0. To a large degree, that's because Stalin and the Soviet Union covered it up, lied about it, and denied it. And they did it for over 60 years. And of course, the president of Russia continues to deny it to this very day. And his active trolls are not just denying the Holodomor, but trying to cover it up as well. So that's the reason for the campaign. And then in December, we're going to apply to 3 major dictionaries in the world: the Oxford English Dictionary, Merriam-Webster, and dictionary.com, which is a digital dictionary. All of them want to see that the usage of the word is up and is adequate for inclusion in a dictionary, but they also want to see a really strong petition and enough people asking for it to be included. Go to the website www.change.org/the Holodomor, one word, the Holodomor.
Here's an excerpt from a satirical video, #DeepTruth. It turns Stalin on his head, confessing to his responsibility for the Holodomor and for its cover-up.
Take the Holodomor genocide, a man-made famine in the Ukraine in the 30s that killed millions. Well, guess which man made it? Denial, censorship, lies, and no one knows anything about it. Good luck finding anything in the dictionary.
The word Holodomor actually is derived from two Ukrainian words, holod, which means hunger or famine, and morete, which means to kill by hunger, and in this case, by a man-made famine. The definition of what constitutes the Holodomor will, of course, refer to the genocide. 17 countries of the world have declared it and recognized it as genocide. 38 countries in the United Nations have signed declarations to that effect as well. The event and the genocide itself is very well documented. It was an attempted genocide which caused the death of untold millions.
On October 29th, Merriam-Webster published its list of new words for 2021. There are 455 of them. These words are now included in its dictionary. Among them, ghost kitchen, a commercial cooking facility used for food preparation consumed off-premises. Fluffer nutter, a peanut butter and marshmallow cream sandwich that uses white bread. Holodomor is not yet among these words at Merriam-Webster. This is Sunce Svit, Tumanyarum is the song. It's about a fog that obscures. Nasha Kasha is supported in part by the Shevchenko Foundation and the Ukrainian Credit Union. New Pathway Ukrainian News delivers news and insight every week in English and Ukrainian. Subscribe today at newpathway.ca. Back in a week, God willing. До милої зустрічі за тиждень часу, дорогі слухачі.
Tuma